What's happening, Bills Mafia? Ryan Thomas back for another episode, of course, of your favorite podcast. Hopefully one of your favorite podcasts, I should say, on the Buffalo Fan Base Network, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And last week, I had Rob Crippen on the show. I greatly enjoyed having Rob on the show. I have a guest coming on for next week's podcast. Really excited about that. Tonight, you'll be tuning in to just me, myself, and I. Wanted to riff a little bit on some of the big storylines that are kind of permeating in my mind surrounding the Buffalo Bills. It is March 27th, Wednesday, which is very important to remind you guys that on the Buffalo Fan Base Wednesdays at 8, every Wednesday, you will be able to tune in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. And this show is proudly sponsored by 26 Shirts. One of the greatest things to ever happen to this community is not only the Buffalo Bills, but the fandom and the businesses that have been created within that fandom umbrella that is the Bills Mafia. Del Reed has done a phenomenal job creating a company that helps give back to the community. I'm very big on that. I'm very big on blooming where you're planted, as is Buffalo Bills quarterback Josh Allen. So I think running that theme, blooming where you're planted, is really big, really important. And with that, of course, go to 26shirts.com, give them a follow, buy a few t-shirts. They always have great sales going on. And, of course, Del Reed really appreciates it as that money then goes back into the community as well. So, with that being said, Buffalo Fan Base, you're tuning in Wednesdays every week at 8. Fire away your comments in the comment section below. I'll be sure to get to those comments as we trickle through this episode here. Won't be able to get to them live as I'm kind of riffing here, but I will respond to any and all comments that you guys write and post to this, whether you're tuning in on Facebook, you're tuning in on my YouTube channel or the Fan Base YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate everybody that has tuned in. 20,000 viewers last week, 17,000 the week before. So I'm hoping to see the viewership just rise each and every week as we inch closer and closer to the 2024-2025 Buffalo Bills season. And with that, of course, I got to remind you guys to subscribe to this podcast. You'll get instant notifications when I go live or in any other content that I post outside of my podcasts. I'm very active on my YouTube channel, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, posting shorts each and every week, up to 3 to 5 shorts a week. You can get 60 seconds, 15 seconds of me just giving my take on certain sports topics. So, with that being said, let me get to the first topic of discussion. And of course, if you guys want to follow me on social media at Ryan Thomas Take, that's where you can find me on Instagram as well as X. And I want to get to the first talking point that I have in relations to Buffalo Bills head coach Sean McDermott. Now, Sean McDermott celebrated a birthday a couple days ago. Von Miller celebrated his birthday yesterday. And I say that because I wish them both a happy birthday, number one. Number two, I'm noticing maybe with not just experience in the head coaching position, as well with age, I'm noticing Sean McDermott is a little bit different this time around this offseason. And it dates back to the scouting combine and most recently the NFL owners meetings that were conducted by the local media with their respected teams that they cover. Obviously, here in Buffalo, we had, guys like Matt Beauvais, who I know really well, Matt Perino, who I know really well, Sal Capaccio. They're all in this little scrum. Josh Reed, he's out there, my guy Josh Reed. They're all out there asking Sean McDermott some questions in relations to the 2023 season, as well as the 2024 offseason, what that 2023 season bookending the way that it did means for this upcoming team and how they're going to make this team better. And really, I came away very excited from that interview and the answers that Sean McDermott provided to the Buffalo media, largely, I recognized a difference in Sean McDermott, a coach that is aware that, yes, he's had a lot of success, 6 out of 7 years in the playoffs, 4 straight divisional titles, but they have fallen far short in terms of where they want to be and in their mind, in their eyes, where they should be. And to me, that's refreshing, because you could say, well, hey, where was this 2 years ago? Where was this 3 years ago? Where was this 4 years ago? Better late than never. And quite frankly, they thought they would have got it done by now. They thought that they would have won the Super Bowl just as much as you or I thought that they were going to go or to win a Super Bowl these last few years, but they came up short. And the fact that they recognize that is a lot more than I can say for their counterpart in Buffalo, the Buffalo Sabres. It seems like the Bills are recognizing somewhat where they've gone wrong and where they've fallen short, whereas the Buffalo Sabres kind of continue to do the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. And it just has not produced a different result. The Sabres are in a 13-year playoff drought, whereas the Buffalo Bills are not in any playoff drought. They've been one of the top contenders of their conference, divisional champions, as I mentioned, the last 3 years. So Sean McDermott seems fully aware of where the team is at. And the question is, being aware of where the team is at and knowing the direction that the team needs to go in is really the caveat, really the next step to accomplishing what the Bills want to accomplish. And that is winning a Super Bowl, first Super Bowl in franchise history, first major championship in the city of Buffalo in the modern era of Super Bowl and or Stanley Cup, which dates back to the early 1960s in the case of the NFL, and the 1970 year for the Buffalo Sabres. Neither franchise has won a major Super Bowl, modern Super Bowl era, I should say 1965 to present day, which 1965, the year my parents were born. So it just goes to show you that, along this way, 57, 58 years, Buffalo has not been able to win a major championship, but they've come close plenty of times over that time frame. We know that all too well. So to me, the next step from here is finding where the Bills need to improve, finding where the Bills need to gain some ground. Where can they improve their roster in a form and fashion that would allow them to somewhat get ahead of the curve, get ahead of the game, get ahead of their competition. And to me, this offseason is as crucial as any due to the reasons that I've talked about in previous weeks, the salary cap situation. Teams in the AFC, in particular, improving. The Baltimore Ravens, the Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, they've been getting better these last few years. And then you have the juggernauts, the Kansas City Chiefs, the Cincinnati Bengals, who fell off a cliff after Burrow was hurt, but they'll be back once Burrow is back and healthy. Rest assured, they'll be contenders once again. You have some coaching changes this offseason as well. You have the coaching change in LA with the Chargers, that is, with Jim Harbaugh, a proven winner, a guy that has won everywhere he's coached, whether it was Stanford, whether it was San Francisco, whether it was Michigan. Now he's coaching for the LA Chargers, and I know that the Chargers are going to be much, much different this season in comparison to years past. So how does Buffalo stay or improve on where they've been heading into this upcoming season and beyond? And to me, that depends on Brandon Beane's draft plan. Now, the draft is always important. I feel like I say it every year just as much as you hear a politician say, this election's the most important election in the history of the country. I feel like I say every single year, the draft is just as important as any in previous years. This year, I say that, though, and I think it's a really safe assessment when you kind of look at the Bills this upcoming season, next season, and the year after that. This is one where they're relaying the foundation of the home to build a nice mansion. That's what you're hoping for in this position that Brandon Beane is in, with 11 draft choices, opening up this cap space that he has, being on the right side of it rather than the wrong side of it. Mock draft analysts, team analysts, whoever you want to go out and consume as far as content-wise related to the Buffalo Bills, they would be the first ones to tell you that the Buffalo Bills, as would I be the first one to tell you, that they need to add a receiver. They've done that already in free agency with Curtis Samuel, but most fans, myself included, would hope that Buffalo would try to go out and get another one. And I think that that is a worthy thought. To me, I talked about it with Rob Crippen last week, that you can never have too many weapons in this league, and this is a little bit of an arms race in the National Football League. We've seen it a time or two. We've seen the Cincinnati Bengals go out and get T. Higgins and then Jamar Chase. We've seen the Minnesota Vikings draft Justin Jefferson and then a few years later go out and draft Jordan Addison. I said Mario Addison, Jordan Addison. And we've also seen the Seattle Seahawks. They went into last year's draft with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then they added Jackson Smith and Jigba to that. So you get my point here. Teams that even have weapons are adding more weapons to help their quarterback, to help their team get better offensively, of course. And it even goes to this offseason when you look at the Atlanta Falcons and what they've done, adding Kirk Cousins. They're trying to revamp their entire offense. They've made a plethora of moves at the wide receiver position to try to bolster their offense up, get their offense on the right track. And that's big. Darnell Mooney being a big piece of that. He's always been a player that I've liked, but he's never really played with a great quarterback. In Buffalo's case, they had Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel, a player I like, but he's never really played with a high-level quarterback, the likes of which that is Josh Allen. So realistically, I'm very excited to see the Bills form this offense around Josh Allen. And a statistic that is a fact, of course, as most statistics are, would kind of be a shock to Bills fans that the Buffalo Bills have not drafted a wideout in the first round since Sammy Watkins in 2014. So it's been quite some time since the Bills drafted a wideout in the first round, 10 years, as a matter of fact. So the time is now. And this draft class at the wide receiver position is as good as any. You have Marvin Harrison Jr., you have Malik Neighbors. Those are the guys that are going to be drafted in the top 5. So who are the other guys? It's a class at that position, a cream of the crop class that I think rivals any other great wide receiver class, truthfully. Brian Thomas Jr., can have a little bit of fun with that for obvious reasons. My name being Ryan Thomas, I'm no junior, but we're going to have a little bit of fun with that. If that ends up happening in Buffalo, rest assured I will have some fun with that. Merchandise, all that stuff, kind of, innuendo, jokes, hardy har, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Jokes. If the Buffalo Bills do draft Brian Thomas, I got a few things lined up for that. Rome Odunze, he's a receiver that is projected to be picked in the top 15. Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. Xavier Worthy out of Texas. Blew out the stopwatch set the stopwatch on fire, I should say, with the quick 40 time 4.21. And Ladd McConkey, a sure, smooth route runner, the likes of which I think you check the tape and you say, wow, this guy is pretty well-rounded. He's pretty good. He's got the goods. And that makes me say to myself, you know what? Any one of those guys that I just mentioned, as I mentioned to Rob last week, would be somewhat the apple of my eye in the first round. But I know a thing or two about this class. 2024, that is, not just the wide receivers, but the corners, the safeties, the offensive linemen, of course, the linebackers, the running backs, all those positions could all be argued as serious needs for the Buffalo Bills. And I definitely say that this is a draft where you don't want to necessarily pigeonhole yourself. If you're Brandon Beane, you want to put yourself in a position to where you're making your team better no matter how you're doing it. What are we going to do to simply make this team better? And it sounds so plainly obvious, but what I mean in that is not just drafting a wide receiver, not just going into the first round and saying wide receiver or bust. That can cause you to make a mistake. That can cause you to reach. That can cause you to draft a player at that position that's basically, for lack of a better term, the run to the litter. If there is a run on wide receivers and the Bills just take a wide receiver to take one, that's not really something that they have ever done before. And I'll go back to last year's draft when Brandon Beane saw that run on wide receivers from 20 to 24, and he said, you know what? I can't get ahead of this. These teams want these guys. I can't move up, but I will move up for the next best thing. And the next best thing was the best version of that thing at tight end with Dalton Kincaid in last year's draft class. So do we see the Bills, being that they're picking 28th overall, realistically, it's much harder to move up the further back that you are. So if it is harder for the Buffalo Bills to move up, which I anticipate highly that it will be, then does Buffalo go in a different direction? Do they go with another type of skill position player? Or do they go with a different position that altogether would be looked at as a skill position on the defensive side of the ball, a corner or a safety or a defensive tackle, defensive end? Trust me, I know that Bills Mafia does not want to see the Buffalo Bills draft a defensive lineman. We've seen a lot of defensive linemen come through here, Von Miller included, but in the draft, A.J. Epinesa, Boogie Basham, who is gone, Greg Rousseau, but you can never have too many pass rushers. And, of course, I think when you're looking at not just pass rushers, defensive tackles, defensive ends, you got to look at defensive tackles too. And right now you only have two able-bodied players at that position in Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones. So I could easily argue, that just as much as I'm banging on the door for the Bills to go out and take a wide receiver, it's just as important, if not more important, and more of a need due to a lack of depth. At least the Bills have Stephon Diggs and Curtis Samuel at wideout. At least they got a guy by the name of Khalil Shakir that is a sure route runner and a guy that is only going to continue to ascend, in my opinion, and that's all we've seen from him thus far, so I don't think I'm outlandish in saying that. But this defensive tackle group is also pretty damn good in this class, and one that I know my boys at 24/7 Buffalo Fandemonium really love would be, I believe his name is Sweet. I'm going to see if I can get that right. And if I didn't, I apologize. Okay, so you have Byron Murphy. Okay. Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat. Those are two of the top-rated guys. Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat, both out of Texas. Okay. And who's to say that one of those two guys is not the apple of Buffalo's eye? I think Byron Murphy is looked at as more of a top 15, top 20 type player. Sweat looked at as a 20 to 30 guy. So that could be a position that Buffalo goes after. As well, with those two players, you have Jerzon Newton, who I'm very familiar with. They talk about his limitations, but I'd look at more of his block shedding ability, more of his movement as a 3 to 5 technique player, working in any alignment, whether it's a 3-4, a 4-3, or a 4-2-5, which is well known in Buffalo. And of course, Chris Jenkins out of Michigan, one of the shadow of a doubt strongest players in this draft class. But I would say that he could be looked at as more of a day two guy. So do they go in that wide receiver position first, then a defensive tackle in the second? I think it's very likely that at the very least, whether it's two wide receivers in the first three picks, whether it's a wide receiver in the first, a defensive tackle in the second, and then a corner in the third, or safety in the fourth or third, or they trade up into the third, that, could be the direction that they go in. And I wouldn't be against any of those things. But I offer those to you because I think that there are more alternative plans out there than just the Bills going out and drafting a wide receiver. Now, if they do that, like I said, I will not be upset about it. That would be my preferred choice. And there are preferred choices within that position. Guys that I really like, Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell being the two, to just add more firepower, more weaponry, more for Josh Allen. And, last week I had a comment that an exchange, rather, that one of the guys watching my show said, hey, you believe that Josh Allen's the most talented quarterback in the league. Why should Josh Allen need more weapons if he's the most talented quarterback in the league? Last I checked, the sport of football does not require you to have one great quarterback to get you to the Super Bowl. That does not happen. This is not the NBA. This is not the Chicago Bulls with Michael Jordan. Granted, I'd say Josh Allen is a Michael Jordan-esque player, but Jordan didn't win alone. That's my point with that comparison. It takes a team. It takes a group. It takes dedication, commitment, competitiveness to put yourself in that upper echelon of contendership. And to me, Josh Allen has shown and proven that he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in the game, if not the most talented. And I don't think many people would disagree with me on that. But I don't think the Bills have done as good a job as some of these other teams in terms of building around their quarterback. I would argue that there was a series of years where the Ravens did not have the weapons for Lamar Jackson. They went out, they got weapons for their quarterback this past offseason, and it helped propel Lamar Jackson, in some people's opinion, rightfully or wrongfully, to an MVP season. So the moral of this is, go get weapons for Allen. You put talent with more talent. It's not a hard estimation. You can never have too many weapons in this league. Anytime you have the ability to go get more weapons for your most talented player, yes, that is a good thing. So I'm not quite sure to this day what argument this guy was trying to make, as a Kansas City Chiefs fan as well, what kind of argument he was trying to make within talking about that to me. And I wanted to address it because it was a long exchange where I felt like I repeated myself probably 7 times or 70, just to be, more accurate. But yes, I do believe Josh Allen's the most talented quarterback in the league. And I do believe you go out and get more talent for that guy and maximize his talent by putting more talent around him. It's not a hard conclusion to come to. And any other connotation of that is blasphemous, in my opinion. So all I'm saying is, most talented guy, go get talent for the most talented guy. Don't leave him with just Stephon Diggs. You've already started this talent-adding process by bringing in Dalton Kincaid. Look what that did. Once they started to get Kincaid involved in the offense, post Ken Dorsey and present Joe Brady, things looked a lot better for Josh Allen. He didn't have to do as much as far as being over-relied upon within this offense. At one point, statistics showed that Josh Allen accounted for 90% of Buffalo's offense in the Brian Daboll years. There was not much around him until they got Diggs. That was huge, obviously. He's on his way to, Hall of Fame type numbers. Wall of Fame at the very worst in Buffalo Bills history. One of the best receivers in Bills history. And you add to that talent. You add more to Diggs, Kincaid, Knox, who took a pay cut this year so they could go out and get some guys. And I think running back is another position that I have not really talked about as much as I can and as much as I should. Wide receiver is huge. Don't get me wrong. That I talked about that, right? But they have essentially 3 running backs right now on the roster, 3 true running backs on the roster right now. James Cook, of course, Ty Johnson, and Darrington Evans, and then Reggie Gilliam, who is a fullback / tight end. So Buffalo going out and getting a running back, veteran running back, more likely than not, trying to keep things on the cheap, or maybe they use a mid-round draft choice on a running back. I would not be opposed to either one, but addressing those positions is what's most important to me. Knowing and recognizing that more talent needs to be added to those positions to pair with your most talented player as going out and getting weapons for your quarterback, one of the best in the game, Josh Allen. And of course, when I look at the Bills, I'd like to look at the AFC East too. And to me, judging the AFC East is very interesting right now. AFC East offseason additions. Now, we go to the New England Patriots, and I'd say to myself, the Patriots didn't make the moves that I thought they would. Gerard Mayo said, I'm going to go out. I'm going to spend money. We're going to spend our cap. We're going to get some really good players. Not really going out and doing that. There's not really a lot of guys that I could pull up here on their transaction sheet and say, wow, I'm really scared of these players, and I'm not trying to sound like a jerk in saying that, but really the only one that jumps out to me would be Antonio Gibson. A few years ago, Austin Hooper was very good. They've kept some of their own, Mike Onwenu, and of course, re-signing Kendrick Bourne was big, but he's coming off of a torn knee. And KJ Osborne has really been the only move that has really jumped out to me. And that's like a 2/3 wideout. So I'm not really too worried about that thus far, but I know that their draft plans are going to be in a little bit of a rebuild mode. Now, the New York and that rebuild mode essentially means that, they're going to go out, they're going to get a quarterback. They're going to be building around that quarterback in these early stages of his development. Jacoby Brissett brought in too to kind of smooth that bridge transition type thing once it's time for their starter to take the reins, be taking the reins from a solid vet. I want to talk about the Jets and what they've done this offseason. So, to me, this offseason is extremely important for the Jets. Their fortunes last season were stymied by the early season injury to Aaron Rodgers. 4 plays into his career with the New York Jets, he tears his Achilles. Going out and looking at who they've signed, have they signed anyone that has really blown me away? Not necessarily. And I say this with all due respect. If they do not build around that offensive line anymore, heading into this offseason, I said this to myself, they don't build this offensive line, Aaron Rodgers is just going to get hurt again. I don't know if they were watching the Thomas take, but I will say that they listened, because they did go out and they did sign 3 key offensive line pieces: Tyron Smith, John Simpson, Morgan Moses, all offensive linemen that have started a lot of games. And then they added Jake Hansen as a re-signed player, brought back along with Thomas Morstead, the re-signed punter. And of course, God forbid if Aaron Rodgers got hurt again, you got a familiar face in the Meadowlands at the backup quarterback position for the New York Jets, none other than the drought killer Tyrod Taylor, signed by the New York Jets. So the Jets, I think they've done what they've needed to do. I don't know if those linemen are in their prime necessarily, especially in the case of Tyron Smith. He suffered quite a few injuries over the years, but rest assured, they went out and got linemen, and I think they're going to get more. I think they should get more. Their number one priority is not weaponry. They got enough of that. Their number one priority is not the running game. They got their running back, right? Number one priority, how do we keep Aaron Rodgers upright? How do we keep him as healthy as possible? And they did a good job at that thus far by adding to that unit on their offensive line. So, of course, the last team I want to mention, it was a team that was the closest to the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East as things came to, of course, a screeching, halt for the Miami Dolphins. Week 17, that divisional crown was on the line. And, of course, the Dolphins came up short once again to the Buffalo Bills. So what can they do to bridge the gap that is between them and the Bills? And I think, to be quite honest with you, there will always be a gap between the Bills and the Dolphins as long as the Dolphins have Tua Tagovailoa and as long as the Bills have Josh Allen. So taking a look at what the Dolphins did, they signed Isaiah Wynn. They got him back. They signed Shaquille Barrett. They signed defensive tackle Jonathan Harris. They signed Kendall Fuller. They signed Neville Gallimore. They also signed Aaron Brewer, offensive lineman. They signed Anthony Walker Jr., Jody Fortson. One of, I think, the most underrated players in recent years, linebacker Jordan Brooks. They signed him from Seattle. And they also signed two former Buffalo Bills, as we're aware, Jordan Poyer and Siran Neal. Now, I talked about where Poyer's at. I talked about how I think he'll fit in. Obviously, it's nice for him that he's getting another opportunity. I don't know if he's the player that he'll be or that he was in Buffalo. I don't think he'll be the player in Miami that he was in Buffalo, but I don't want to say that. I feel grimy saying that. I know I said it already, but he's 34 years old, and he's played very, very rough and tough over the last 7 to 8 years. So, obviously they had to go in a different direction, as did he. But Miami was going to make some additions to this team. How they went about it, I'm very interested to see how these additions actually fit and work. I felt like they lost a lot of guys as well. And that goes to the Andrew Van Ginkels. That goes to, some of the other names that aren't coming to me right now, the Jerome Bakers and such that are out and things like that. There's just a lot of change with the Dolphins that I don't necessarily feel like they needed or expected to make these mass amounts of changes heading into 2024. So I don't really know if any one of these teams has bridged the gap between themselves and the Buffalo Bills this offseason. Biggest part of this offseason, though, for all three teams, including the Buffalo Bills, 4 teams, that is, in the AFC East, is, of course, the 2024 NFL Draft. And to bookend the show tonight, of course, I will be sure to be live on the air for the NFL Draft on my own social media channels as well as the fan base. And I look forward to providing correspondence, updates, things of that nature from the brand new studio for the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Yes, new state-of-the-art studio where a lot of good things are going to happen, right? A lot of really cool moments will be added and shared between myself and the plethora of guests that I will be able to have on in person. We're not talking COVID stuff. We're not talking Zoom. We're not talking stream and all that. I'd love to get some people in person on my podcast. I have a vision for this, and I'm really excited to put that vision together with the new opportunity that I have to do so. So stay tuned for that. 2024 football season, 2025 as well. And I really appreciate you guys tuning in for the 33 minutes and change that you have. Of course, this is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. My name is Ryan Thomas. You can follow along at Ryan Thomas Take on X, on Instagram. You can subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on YouTube. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I really appreciate the love and support from the fan base as well. Go Bills. The draft, we're inching closer and closer. I cannot wait. I'll see you guys next Wednesday at 8 o'clock with a very special guest. Thank you for tuning in.